Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again in this YouTube astrology segment. I'm going to be talking about astrology in the Boulder, Colorado shootings. Many of you may have heard that on Monday, on March 22nd, 2021, there was a shooting in, I think it's called a King Swoopers supermarket in Boulder, Colorado. At least 10 people were confirmed dead as a result. I mean, I just wish all this madness would stop. First thing I want to state is that I want to offer my condolences to the close friends and family members of the victims. And may they be in a better place right now, the people that perished as a result of what to me seems like very supreme psychotic behavior, to say the absolute least. That would probably be a vast understatement. I'm going to be talking about the chart and astrological chart for that event, and see where what transits at the time were contributed to this madness. And first thing I'm looking at, okay, according to what I researched on the internet, it seems like the approximate time was 2:30 p.m. on March 22nd, 2020 in Boulder, Colorado of this event. It puts the sun in Aries, of course. The ascendant is in Leo, and the moon is in Cancer. Now, having Leo on the ascendant in the event chart, that's basically the face of this. Leo is very flamboyant, showy energy. This is very obviously something that garnered a lot of attention, to say the absolute least. This may have been a person that was just starving for attention and just did this and expressed this in some very warped type of fashion. And the thing about this is too, and I'm looking at this as well, having the sun being obviously some volatile Aries, and this is something where I noticed looking at this chart as well, is that you have Venus in Aries conjunct the Sun. This is about, I mean, the Sun can be how one wants to shine. This was with a lot of doing something very acrimonious, and Venus in conjunction with it is a love for that. The love, the first planet is Venus in the order, um, of these, these Aries, this Aries energy. Venus is about the love of something, and Venus and Aries could be about love of acrimony, love of combat, violence, and then this followed by the Sun shining in that, and then followed by Chiron and Aries, which of course led to a lot of physical wounds, and in this case, sadly, death as a result. Um, the thing about this too is looking at this as well, one thing that stands out to me, okay, I would call this controversial cardinal T-square configuration. And when I say controversial, it's because I'm using the midheaven as a point in the configuration. Many astrologers will look at configurations in the chart and only use the planets. I think the midheaven is a very prominent point in the chart, and it would fall as the focal point in the cardinal T-square configuration. Now, this cardinal T-square configuration consists of the moon in Cancer opposing Pluto in Capricorn, and the focal point being the midheaven in Aries. Now, when you have the opposition in the T-square configuration, is where you have that adversarial energy, which really is it's overcompensated by the focal point. Now, having the moon opposing Pluto, that tells me that there couldn't be enough need. It's almost like there can't be enough need for death in a very negative manifestation, or power or control. And Pluto being in Capricorn, of course, it could be very, very undemonstrative, cold-fashioned murders. Because when you have Pluto opposing the moon, the moon is about the emotional needs, and what we feel, what we need. And the thing about it is, in having Pluto away from it, it's like not being able to get enough need for death, sadly, and maybe in this case is how it manifests, and not enough need for death or murder. And being in Cancer, it's a lot of this for emotional security. Perhaps it falls in the 12th house of mental illness, the moon in Cancer in this event chart. And looking at the point, the focal point, which I consider the midheaven in Aries, that's the over accentuation point, overemphasis point, which really wound up being getting a lot of notoriety for gunfire, for volatile actions, acrimony. That's how I see how that manifested and panned out in this particular instance. Now, the thing too is looking at this as well, the ruler of the 8th house of death slash murder. Okay, one of the rulers is in the 10th house. In this event chart, Aquarius is on the 8th house of death and murder. One of the rulers, Uranus, falls in the 10th house of notoriety and recognition. So that's an indicator of the murder. The murder is, of course, getting a lot of infamy. And maybe the fact that Uranus is in Taurus, maybe that has to do with warped values or bizarre value system. Now, another thing too, what I'm looking at as well is that the ruler of the 4th house. Now you have Venus. Libra is on the cusp of the 4th house in this event chart. The ruler is in the 9th house of global communications. 4th house could be connected with the end of life. Could also be, it could be an indicator of the fact that the ruler of that 4th house, Venus, is conjunct the Sun in Aries, so people were looking for emotional security and safety through law enforcement. Aries, I would say, could be connected with law enforcement. The Sun, and the Sun in Aries could be, the Sun could be about authority, and then being in Aries, law enforcement. So this is maybe this manifested in what people were seeking at the time for their security, more so than usual, as far as law enforcement goes, as far as protection goes at this time. And it's interesting that in this event chart, the 4th house is intercepted. And when you have interceptions in astrology, interceptions can give sometimes distortion of energy. Scorpio is intercepting the 4th house. Scorpio could be very relentless energy. The 4th house, of course, is associated with emotional security and safety. So they couldn't get enough, really looking relentlessly, maybe these people, sadly, for some kind of safety. And this was something, obviously, very heinous and terrible event. Another thing, too, is that I noticed, too, that Neptune in this event chart falls in the 8th house of murder. So it's another thing, it's another indicator where you have a very senseless, confounding kind of murder, and one that was going to be on television. Neptune is connected with filmography. Another thing that stood out to me in this chart is that Mars is conjunct the North Node in Gemini in this chart. Now, Mars is the planet connected with volatility. Gemini is very high-strung, excitable energy. The fact that it conjoins the North Node could be an indicator that this was sadly, this was like some odd, destiny. And it might be playing, and this happened, and this is in the 11th house of groups. And this was in a supermarket where you had a lot of people in there. And the thing about it is, Gemini is also the sign of the twins. It's like a person took on another identity, maybe, when he committed this crime. Also, too, that Mars in this chart squares Mercury in Pisces. Mercury is in its fault and detriment in Pisces, and it also, that as well, falls in the 8th house of murder and death. And when you have Mercury in adverse aspect to Mars, just by itself, that aspect can indicate some difficulty controlling, perhaps angry thoughts, and really thinking things out prior to volatile behavior. The moon, Mercury in Pisces can give very chaotic thinking. Mars in Gemini, of course, can have volatile actions that are very excitable and high-strung, volatile type of actions. So you can basically do the math. Hold on a moment. Sorry about that, I'm back, but anyway. And another thing that stands out is that, look at this as well, there's an inconjunct aspect between looking at the moon and Saturn. It's a loose inconjunct aspect as far as orbs go. But when you have inconjunct aspects in astrology, they can be about adjustments. It might be doing too much of one thing or another. Now we have the moon in Cancer, making the inconjunct aspect to Saturn in Aquarius. Now the thing about it is, maybe Saturn in Aquarius in some cases can be expressed taking responsibility for bizarre, unorthodox behavior. And there really maybe has not been enough of that in this particular example. And then the moon in Cancer can be reacting maybe over emotionally. Maybe this had something to do with maybe some kind of ridicule or criticism that this person endured. It falls in the 12th house of mental illness in this event chart, so it shows that there's too much of one or another. Yes, the person apparently the suspect was apprehended yesterday, but in his own mind he may not be taking accountability for the actions or feel that he's not responsible for it. But assuming this is the person that committed these murders, he will be doing that anyway. And Saturn does fall in the 7th house of justice and legalities, and I think injustice will be served. But sadly, this is another situation where people are obviously put in a very strong state of trepidation because of this. And the thing is, really, I'm just trying to see if there's anything else in this chart has anything to do, any other transits that placements that might be tied in with this situation. I noticed too that 9 of the 10 planets are in the top half of the chart, which indicates, of course, that's more gregarious energy, so to speak, more attention-seeking energy. And this is it's no wonder this was such a high-profile shooting spread. I don't know if you would call it a mass shooting, but if it's not, it certainly would be very close to it, to say the absolute least. So another thing that's interesting is that the Saturn in Aquarius, Saturn could be connected with authority. It's opposing the first house cusp, so it shows a tremendous opposition, perhaps in this case from law enforcement, that are acting really in the way that they need to be acting, putting themselves on the line against an individual that was, I would say, selflessly, maybe to some degree, and putting themselves on the line again for somebody that was really maybe just clamoring for some kind of attention, sadly. And anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.